All right, welcome everyone. Um, Thank you to everyone who has joined us. Looks like we're at about 80 people. Sure we'll be getting a few more as we get going, but we want to make sure that we get started to close on time. So tonight we're talking about secondary virtual school. So the virtual school for students in grades 6 through 12. If you had a chance to come to our first webinar, we talked about kind of the overall general idea of virtual, and then we kind of ran into the idea that we really need to think about tailoring these conversations towards either elementary or secondary. So this is our opportunity to talk to secondary students and families and parents about what virtual school will look like in the secondary world. So with us tonight, my name is David Farley. I'm the Director of Online Education for Bay City Public Schools. We have Patrick Malley. He is the Chief Academic Officer of Bay City Public Schools. And Shelley Ducharme. She is the Director of Elementary Education, gifted and talented, a few other things added onto there for Bay City Public Schools. So if you came to our first webinar, we shared a slide deck with you, and we kind of talked through a very pre-planned thought process and planning process for where we were. This time, we're going to utilize a bit of a different format. So if you look on your screen, there's that Q&A box. What we would really like for you to do is to use that question and answer for us to have more of a conversation. It was somewhat awkward the first time, just kind of talking into the void and just kind of talking about a pre-planned slides. So we think doing it this way will make it a little more natural, have a little more natural feeling if we kind of have a moderated discussion. So Shelley will be Shelley will be kind of facilitating this conversation, asking questions that come up via the chat, or some of the questions that we've gotten through a lot of email questions that are important for us to answer to the whole group. But Shelley will get us started on this process.
Good evening. Hi, everybody. We're glad you could join us tonight. Really, we'd like to start the conversation with Patrick really taking a look at the fact that we know that many families are really waiting. We're all on the edge of our seats to hear the countywide return to learning plan in order to make our best decision for all of our own kids. So what can you share with us so far regarding that plan and what we might be able to expect or when?
Sure. We thought it was really important to address this question before talking about the virtual option, just because we know it's front of mind for a lot of folks. And as the participant number, continues to rise as we continue here, we know that some of you are on here because of questions that you have just in general about what school is going to look like, and that you're considering virtual education as an opportunity for your child because of that uncertainty. And we fully appreciate that. That being said, I just want to say from the outset that Bay City Public Schools has had a virtual high school for the last year, and we're expanding that virtual opportunity to students in grades K through 8, in light of the fact that was the direction we were heading anyway. Perhaps not at as fast a clip, but the current pandemic has certainly made us realize that virtual is a viable opportunity for students to learn at their own pace in their own environment, in a manner that meets their unique individual needs. And so that's what we're going to spend our most of our night here talking about tonight, is just what does that virtual opportunity look like? What do those options for families and students look like? But because we know that some of you are here because you have some broader questions, I want to just share with you where we currently are. Bay City Public Schools is currently working with Bay and Aranet County school districts in a collaborative group to plan our return for the fall. That plan will be made public next week. So you'll start hearing our district talk more and more about that plan when it becomes public and when it's released from the counties at that time. What I can share now is essentially what's been posted on Facebook and on our website yesterday. And that is that the state is requiring that districts plan for 3 possible scenarios that align with the various phases of the governor's Michigan Safe Start Plan. So, for example, when the state or our region is in phase 5 or 6 of that plan, meaning that cases are on the decline and that the state is generally reducing requirements on all aspects of social life in order to open up the state because of declining cases, then schools will be able to operate in person with much less restrictive measures being put into place. The state is also asking the schools put a plan together for when the state or the region is in phase 4, which is where we're at currently. And when in phase 4, schools will still be able to operate in person, but they have to put into place some increased safety restrictions, such as masks or barriers and other elements. But in phase 4, we'll still be able to have that in-person learning as an option. If the state or our region is in phase 1 through 3, which would occur if COVID cases rise or continue to rise for an extended period of time, then the state will require that we put a plan, is requiring that we put a plan together to again operate remotely. And so Bay City Public Schools is working with these other school districts in Bay and Aranet County to make sure that our we get the best thinking in the room to plan for each of these phases. Now, obviously, the plan that we all want to follow is the phase 5 or 6 plan that has very low restrictions on what schools look like, and that families that want the flexibility of virtual can continue to choose virtual, and families that want to choose in-person learning continue to experience school the way that we all know it to be. However, we are required to put this plan together that addresses all 3. And we really look forward to sharing more information about those plans with the public starting next week, and I would imagine for the subsequent weeks after.
Thanks, Patrick. So while we can empathize, I guess I'll say, well, we can empathize that many of you are probably here hoping for some answers specific to the return to learning plan. Really tonight our focus is about the virtual school and that 100% virtual option. And we are really excited to share the details that we have with you tonight. So David, can you share with us how BCPS virtual might compare to other virtual schools? What will make our program different than many or most other virtual schools?
So to start, I think one of the, I guess maybe the most important parts of our virtual school, because I'm looking at a few of the questions that have popped in that kind of surround this question as well, is that if you choose Bay City Virtual, you are choosing a Bay City Public Schools option. And what's important about that is that you are part of the same district. There's no need for needing to choose a different district. So the things that your students are currently learning, like the plans, everything will stay within the same entity of a district versus having to leave and go to a different district, then coming back. Everything is staying within Bay City Virtual. So if you choose to do Bay City Virtual only because of the pandemic and the flexibility that it will provide during this time, knowing that you'll be able to go back to your Western or your Handy or your Central when that time when you feel that time has come for you to send your student back. On top of that, I think what's really going to make this program work well is that we are staffing our program with Bay City Public School teachers. We are currently in the process of interviewing and hiring what are the kind of our base program. what we're going to start with, and then determine any additional based on enrollment. So we're currently hiring a K-12 PE and health teacher. Not that you're here for an elementary meeting, but we're hiring 2 elementary teachers. We are hiring 4 middle school and 8 high school virtual teachers. So these are teachers that work for Bay City Public Schools that have applied to become a virtual school teacher. We also have currently we have 1 special ed teacher on staff already, and we are anticipating that we will need to hire an additional special ed teacher as well to make sure that we can meet the needs of all of our virtual students. We are also going to be hiring an MTSS coordinator. So that's kind of a new role for our district, and obviously a new role for Bay City Virtual. And this is a position that I'm very excited to have in this virtual school. So this person is going to, the way I look at it is that that an MTSS coordinator is really going to act as a student advocate, to be able to work with students and families, to be able to break down barriers. In a traditional school, this position could be in some ways, work on things like behaviors with families, and work on putting together plans and really thinking about systems for behaviors. Behavior looks much different in a virtual school. A behavior in a virtual school really looks at the engagement, the task completion, the learning that's happening. And within virtual, this position will be able to, this person will be able to work on, say your 7th grade student is struggling, struggling with you, to be able to, really stay on task at home. So maybe this coordinator will be able to work with the families to come up with solid schedules, just like they would in the classroom, coming up with schedules and incentive schedules and things like that. Be able to work with you at home to be able to implement some programs and systems at home to help us make our students be more successful. And then as we get going through, being able to provide support for the social emotional learning, the socialization that kids won't necessarily be getting in the same way, choosing virtual over the traditional face-to-face learning. So what kind of programs and activities can we have in place to make sure that students are still getting a very crucial part of most of our education being that socialization piece. So being able to help coordinate those activities within the realm of an MTSS coordination role.
Great, thank you. So another unique component to our plans for virtual are our student support centers, and we talked about those a bit in that first webinar that we offered when we presented this initial plan. Could you share a little bit more in regards to what that student support center will look like, more specifically at a secondary level?
Yeah, sure. So if you weren't with us in the first one, the student support centers for secondary, we're looking at having them at all of our secondary buildings. So having a support center at Central High School, having a support center at Handy Middle School, having a support center at Western. So that'll be a combined middle school, high school center at the Western complex, and then one also at our Eastern High School, which already holds a spot for our current virtual students from the previous school year. So actually, let me. I'm going to share my screen here in just a second to kind of share what these might look like. But these support centers are going to be an opportunity for students who need extra support to be able to go it and get it face to face from a teacher. That a student that might need some collaboration time to go work with other students who are on the same content as them, or if they just need a quiet. A quiet, comfortable place to work. That will, these centers will be able to do that. So let me see here. I'm gonna go ahead and just kind of present kind of a rendering of what these centers can look like. Now, this is not an exact idea of what it is, but these support centers. So this is what we are looking at for our center at Handy. This is this is kind of an idea of what the Handy classroom could look like. Now we've made a few changes since the renderings were sent in. But the idea being based on, this is like, if you walk in there, that does not look like a classroom. That does not look like what we would traditionally see in a classroom. But instead, it looks like an area we could have some collaborative work with a student. You could have a teacher working with a student or a group of students. So this is kind of, if you were actually sitting in there, this is what it would look like. So we're actually talking about getting rid of this table because we don't see one teacher working with 5 middle school students or high school students anymore, but instead having some more flexibility with this. So if we look at everything you see is movable, so it's not something that is going to be stuck in one place. All these chairs can be moved and changed around to best accommodate the student that's working at it. We would have a screen here above this little horseshoe on the corner, so that if a group of students were working together, they needed a larger screen to be able to present information to their whole group. They'd be able to plug into the TV so that everyone in their group could see the same could see the same materials. We're really just kind of focusing on the idea that this is a quiet, comfortable place for them to come work and get help. So this would be the teacher workstation on the left there. That would be a mobile teacher station. So the teacher would be working from there, and then if they needed to, they'd be able to wheel that over to a student, or get up, take their Chromebook, and move over and work next to a student as needed. So I think it's just a unique thing that we're going to have throughout the district. These tables here would be, we're looking to get more of those. So those are marker board tables. So, if a student is working on math and the teacher needs to come up and help them with math, they'll be able to just draw right on that table and be able to, work side by side with what they're doing, and then move them out of the way when we don't need them.
And David, I'll just add that those desks will have the desk shields or some plastic protectors that we'll be ordering for the entire district, correct?
Yeah. Depending on what we need, or they would just be further, they'd be further apart, and then as conditions allow, we'll be able to move them in, and also getting so you don't see them in the drawings, but having just some larger partitions, so that if we needed to, some larger partitions to be able to to separate the room into areas or whatever is needed as the conditions allow.
Great, thank you. So can you share with us, David, how virtual school, the planning and the implementation, how will this virtual school be a different experience from what we had during our continuity of learning plan? We were really thrown into that situation in the spring, and so can you kind of address that? What will some of the differences be? What will we notice as a major difference?
Sure. So I think before I even talk about how it'll look different, I think it's important to kind of talk about where we came from to get to where we are. So you talked about being kind of thrown into it. We had the opportunity since the spring to really learn about learning remotely or learning from a distance, and it's important to have a distinction of that. Throughout the area and throughout the state, we threw around these different ideas of remote learning and virtual learning and distance learning, and what we were doing was we were learning from a distance, but it wasn't virtual learning. We were really keeping kids engaged in content, and keeping them working on collaborative things, and keeping them keeping the students working and keeping the brain active, but we weren't pushing them with the same rigor that we would have in the classroom, and we weren't pushing them into new content. Virtual, starting the year in a fully virtual environment, this is going to rival the tradition, the rigor of what we would have in our school buildings. But it's going to be done, from home, or from a hotel on vacation, or wherever that student is. No matter where the student is, the learning can take place, and it's not just going to be a continuation of things that they've already learned. so the learning plan allowed us to in the spring to kind of utilize some tools and to get better at teaching, at teaching and learning from a distance. But now this virtual learning is really going to be engaging in new content, just as you would if you were a freshman going into high school. You'll be engaging in freshman content and learning the same or similar content at the same or similar pace. Or if you can accelerate through content, as a freshman, you can move through content. You'll be able to do that faster, but getting through that same content. Or if you need more time to work through something, the great thing about virtual is that a student can take the time on the content they need, and they aren't stuck within the confines of a 55-minute class period that they would be if they were in a classroom. From bell to bell. The bell in virtual is how long does how long does that student need to get the learning done, and really focusing on the learning, not necessarily just getting the work done, but making sure that the learning is taking place.
Thank you. Patrick, before I move on to the next question, anything in that Q&A that pertains to what we've been talking about here that you want to address, or should I move on?
I think you move on. I'm a little nervous to ask another question because I've been answering so many questions in the chat for people. For those of you that aren't looking, if you open up that Q&A window, you'll see that there is an answered section where I've been typing the answers to as many of the quicker questions that I can, just to save time. And obviously, if things come up, Shelley, that I think need to be addressed more, I'll let you know.
Jump in. Okay, sounds good. So back to David then, we have another question. We have several students that are on a variety of learning plans, whether we have special education students with IEPs, students that have 504 accommodations. Are those students eligible for virtual, and how do we accommodate, or how will we support those students?
So that's a really good question that has that kind of continues to come up. I think it's important to answer in a few ways, and they all lead to the same answer. But I think first, virtual learning can be for anyone, but it's probably not for everyone. There are students that may not be as successful in a virtual environment as they are in traditional. Then there are students who are going to be far more successful in a virtual environment than they are in a classroom. It's really important to really think about, is virtual going to be a positive thing for my student? So for a special education student, absolutely. A special education student can be successful in a virtual environment. I talked earlier when I was talking about staffing. I think that we currently have one special education teacher, and we are anticipating the need for at least a part-time or a full special education teacher, depending on how many students that we need to be able to support. So if I'm speaking to you and thinking about if your student has an IEP, or if they have a 504 plan. The thing that the decisions that we would want to make is we would want to get together and get together as a team with with a special education teacher or a general ed teacher, and think about what look at that IEP or that plan and think about what options, what accommodations do we need to make to help that student be successful in a virtual environment. Do we need to make sure that we are scheduling, just as a student in special ed might get help from the teacher on a daily basis or on a weekly basis? Do we need to think about making sure that we schedule specific times for the student to come into the support center, or to schedule specific Zoom calls with the student and the teacher? What accommodations do we need to make for work? So it's really gonna, the emphasis is that it will not be my answer for one student is not gonna be the same for another student, but that it's really gonna have to be looked at, just as special education is. We have to be looked at on an individual basis and deciding what is the best thing for your student. How can we best make sure that your student can be successful and will be successful in a virtual environment?
Okay. So in our first webinar, we really didn't have the opportunity, or we hadn't really discussed honors courses or students that are our higher achieving students. What can you share with us about honors and how they could be placed in a virtual setting?
Sure, yeah. So if you're not familiar with honors, traditionally, so if a student is coming into sixth grade on an honors track, let's say they're doing honors in math, they would typically come in as a sixth grade student, but they would be, their honors cohort would be doing would be working on seventh grade material. So working on material that is more advanced than the grade that they are in, and that is certainly something that we can do. That it's one of the really nice hallmarks of virtual learning is that we can customize the learning for any student. We can customize the content for what that student needs based on their abilities. So if we have a student who is honors, we would be putting them, if a sixth grade math student, we would be putting them into the appropriate seventh grade math content to to make sure that they are appropriately challenged. And just as we would in the classroom, we would then have to make sure that because they are jumping, because they are now going from fifth grade to a seventh grade content, just thinking about what types of steps that we need to build to make sure that there aren't any gaps that we jump over. And that's just one of those great things about virtual is that we can customize the content. So I'll answer it here because I've been asked this before. Is if your student does have does qualify for honors, the question has come up, and I'll answer it now so we don't have to answer it later. If you are in honors and you decide that you want to choose virtual, whether it's for this year or for how long, 2 years, whatever you decide, we will make sure that after this year, if you want to go back to a face-to-face classroom, that you won't lose your spot in that honors class. You will maintain that slot that we've given to you because you are making a decision based on what you think is best for your child. But we're not going to have a specific honors program that happens virtually. Honors is an in-class program, but it is something that we can accommodate virtually through content and through customization of courses to best fit the needs of your students.
Okay, thank you. So you mentioned this a little bit earlier when we started this evening, or maybe it was Patrick, the whole terminology and how that continuity of learning plan, we were all kind of throwing out these educational terms between virtual and blended and hybrid, and what we want to make sure parents understand tonight is those are not all the same and they really should not be used interchangeably. What we are or have been talking about so far is a 100% virtual online option. And David, hopefully you can share with us what a hybrid option would look like. And we want parents to know that while they can choose a 100% virtual, there will be an opportunity, or there is the opportunity to choose hybrid, which David will explain, that comes under that virtual umbrella.
Yeah, so the idea of hybrid is, as you mentioned, something that needs to be defined. So for Bay City Public Schools at the secondary level, what we're looking at is if you choose a hybrid model for your student, it's going to look like the student attending some classes in person. So let's say that you and your child want to do art and phys ed in person. Those are the two classes that your student really wants to make sure that they are doing in person. What we would do is, and the mechanism for how this takes place, will be released soon. But the idea that you could choose to do those two classes in person, and then the rest of your schedule would be remote. The caveats with that, so they could be taking two courses in person. The caveats would be that they have to be courses that, number one, we are already offering within our secondary buildings, and courses that fit within the schedule that we have already created. We don't have the ability to create we don't have the numbers or the ability to create a separate cohort class. So, some people have looked at hybrid, depending on where you look. Hybrid is would only be virtual students taking an in-person course. And at the secondary level, that wouldn't be the case. So with this hybrid option, we're really looking at the students who, let's say we're in a phase that students have to wear, that they have to wear a mask. So that, that might not be what that student wants to do all day long. But maybe they can, they can put a mask on and go to art, and then say, I want to do art in person because that's my passion, but I'm going to do the rest at home, virtually, because that's, that's what I can handle 1 hour. And I want to do the rest virtually because that's what I think that will be best for me. So the mechanism for how that will take place and how you will register for specific courses in person versus virtually, that mechanism will be coming with the in future communication. But we need to be able to appropriately schedule our students both for those in-person classes and the virtual classes.
And so just to summarize, that option for families will fall under the virtual option.
Correct. Yeah. So they would, so it would be students who are taking, what we're looking at is half or more of their schedule virtually. If they're, there are other mechanisms for a student to take online courses while going to a high school. But those are, that is when they would be a high school student taking less, taking two classes online and the rest in person. These would be students who are taking a majority of their courses virtually with an on-site option.
So that really leads us to that hot question of when
Patrick wants to add something to this.
Yeah, I based on some questions that are coming in through the Q&A and what I just heard David talk about, I want to address athletics just a little bit. So athletics are governed by the MHSAA, the rules that school districts follow in order to compete in MHSAA events, require that students are tied to a specific high school. And so there are questions coming in about, I've answered a lot of questions in the Q&A about students being able to participate in athletics. And of course, that's something that we want as a district, is for all of our students, whether virtual or at Western or at Central or Handy, to be able to participate in athletics. But there are some hurdles that we have to jump through with MHSAA that frankly might be too large to even get over because of inter-school athletics and eligibility details that we're working through. So the short-term answer to can we have athletics if our student is in virtual is no. And then of course, as David's talking about the hybrid options, the question comes up about, well, what if my child is hybrid? And so I think these definitions is where it gets kind of murky. That a student, let's say, for example, at Western High School, can take up to 2 online classes and go to Bay Aranac Career Center as part of their regular schedule. And that student, because they're a Western High School student, can participate in athletics. But a student who has 3 or more virtual classes and doesn't have, or let me say this, I'll say, let's say a student has 5 virtual classes and only 1 class at Western, that student is going to be tied to the virtual school, so won't be able to participate in Western athletics. There's a lot of gray in between there that I know, as a parent myself, I'd be thinking like, well, what are the loopholes? What is the way for me to have both of these for my kid? And so if you have some of those questions, I strongly recommend emailing David directly. His email address is available at that bcschools.online address, because I know different individual student circumstances will be different to work out. And so when you take into account things like, what if my kid is in co-op or dual enrolls, or and MHSA rules are so complex and need to go through those athletic directors, that going to David with those questions is going to be your best bet moving forward. But as general rules, I think that conversation about 2 or less online classes, you're a Western or a Central or a Handy student. If more than half your schedule is virtual, then you're a virtual student. And then that does have some impact on on athletics that we need to work through. But I think just in general that hopefully that helps. I think so.
Sure. So back to the hot topic of when do families need to commit, or when or how do they need to make this decision, and who do they let know?
So, Patrick, I think it was the very first question that Patrick answered. Kind of talking about what is this, what is the return to learn plan that the Bay Area ISD is coming out with. So we want to, we need to both be able to provide families enough time to make a decision, and we also need to make sure that as a district we have enough time to provide the appropriate staffing levels, as well as the space and technology to offer a quality virtual program. So once that plan is released by the ISD and sent out to the public, we are going to be sending out communication to all of our families with the ability to opt in. If you're a Bay City public school student, let me preface that. If you're a Bay City public school student, the ability to opt in to the virtual program. And we're gonna put a deadline on that to really allow us to to appropriately staff this program, so that we're not continuously adding teachers throughout and just putting it together with bubble gum and toothpicks. We want to make sure that this is an appropriate program and appropriately staffed. So we're going to put an opt-in deadline on that. Now, we know that students, might make a different decision. You might make a different decision later on, and we will honor that just as we honor as we typically honor a student that wants to go from one building to another. But just know that for us to do this for us to do this at the best ability that we can, we're looking at having students opt in. We're looking at probably that first, that first full week in August, being that that deadline for families to opt in. Now, if you're not a Bay City public school student, if you're a neighboring school, or you're a homeschool student, you're looking to join, we would still want us to enroll. It'd be different than opting in because you're not a Bay City student, but to enroll during that time period as well. And then we'll just know that as students come in, we will have to make sure that we have appropriate staffing. So if a student comes in mid-September, we would need to make sure that we have the ability to appropriately staff the virtual, and we will be looking at anticipating that, so that we're getting the appropriate training for the people ahead of time, so that we're not just adding one student and needing to train an all new set of teachers based on our current enrollment. But that deadline of that first week in August that'll be sent out will really help us put together the best program that we can.
And so really the best place for parents to stay current would be that website, that Bay City or bcschools.online, or our Facebook page, correct?
Correct. Yep.
Okay, great. So I do have one more question. What about families or students maybe that don't have technology, or they may have connectivity issues? How are we going to support those families?
Yeah. So all to be able to do virtual class, coursework and classwork, a student definitely needs access to the content via the internet, via a device. So all students will be provided with a with a Chromebook device to be able to do their schoolwork on, and then that will be the main thing that students will get. When they, most of our area is covered by some type of broadband internet. So if access issues come up, we'd be working with either our MTSS coordinator or our technology team to troubleshoot and brainstorm solutions to make sure that students who are doing virtual are actually able to access the virtual content. So while all students will get a device, those individual solutions that we need to put in place, we will work on being able to solve those access issues to make sure that all students have an equal access to the content, to make sure we're being equitable in being able to access content And we had some practice with that this last spring. We had a lot of practice in making sure that kids were able to get connected. We were able to solve a lot of them, and we learned a lot about how to help families get access to content.
Good, thanks. I just want to revisit, I happened to see a question about a parent is mentioning, they want time to see the plan, and yet we're talking about an opt-in date. So just to keep everybody on the same page there, while we're talking about that end of that first week of August as the quote unquote deadline or the opt-in date, know that is about a week and a half after the plan of the return to learning plan should be released. And so what we're hoping is parents are having a chance to ask questions now about what virtual might look like. So you get in a little bit of an idea ahead of time, so that based on what comes out with that return to learn plan, you're pretty informed, and you may have a pretty good idea of what option you might want to select by that end of that first week in August. Patrick, how are we doing? And those are the questions that we had specifically set out to answer tonight. And I've been trying to also look at the Q&A. It's quite the task to watch the Q&A and have a cohesive conversation. So if we're missing any.
Yeah, I think more than anything, if any questions have not been answered, I strongly recommend, and because I was trying to answer questions, I'm not sure if this has been plugged, but I don't think it can be plugged enough to, go to bcschools.online and sign up to receive David's emails, as that's where he will be updating. You all have asked some phenomenal questions that we've tried answering, but on that website, bcschools.online, is where we'll continue to post frequently asked questions. And it's also through that email list that's being generated by the interest form that's on that website that David will be keeping you informed about timelines. And obviously our district website, bcschools.net, as well as our Facebook page, is where you'll find information about the district's plans in response to the county plan and the state plan to address what school will look like in the fall. We fully appreciate that things are going to come together relatively fast here for a lot of families, and that you're all going to be making some decisions for your children for the fall that maybe you weren't considering a year ago. And so if you have questions, just know that we're here for you, and that we truly do appreciate you reaching out to us, because it gives us that fuel to keep trying to solve the challenges that come up and address the needs of our community. So, on behalf of our whole team and David, thanks for continuing to answer these questions we're throwing your way, and as you build this this K-12 virtual school. And Shelley, thanks for facilitating. Appreciate your time tonight. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, everybody.
Take care.